The Unconventional Therapist's Guide to Nothing.
Hey everybody, welcome to the Unconventional Therapist's Guide to Nothing. My name is Dave. I'm your host. I'm joined here with the spookiest of spooky MCs.
That's right.
MC Greg.
MC Greg, yeah. That's me, MC Greg. Everyone knows that. And Dave, this is our entrance into the Halloween season. This is our spooky season entries to the, year 3 of spooky episodes, which is very exciting. And for me, this is really fun for me because we do research, as you reminded me. Of course, we research, but it's more fun. It's more lighthearted. It's more like, we put a lot of pressure on ourselves with the mental health episodes and certain episodes. So this is a time, I would say Halloween and Christmas are the 2 times of year where we kind of just try to have a little bit more fun with it. And I think they end up being some great episodes.
Yeah, no, I agree. Before we get into the Halloween episodes, I just wanted to actually talk a little bit about an experience I had this weekend, which I thought was kind of interesting. So, as we've talked about before, like sometimes when we do our little deep dives into topics, sometimes I get a little bit more into that topic than you. And I end up becoming like a little obsessive about the topic after the episode and kind of carry.
Yeah, you take your work home with you.
I do. Yeah. That sideshow episode was no exception. And I just got like kind of fascinated and had been looking for like paraphernalia or just things. I actually got obsessed with like the idea that people have photos of these sideshow individuals. And that was something that I was kind of seeking out, trying to find. And I didn't know how much they would cost or anything like that. It turns out I actually already had one. It was a postcard. So of Tom Thumb is like his wedding postcard. So that's old and cool. But I went to this antique show in Pennsylvania this weekend. It's in Allentown, Pennsylvania. It's called a paper show. So it's all like paper stuff, like postcards, photos, posters, all this stuff. And as a joke, I was like, oh, I really hope I find some sideshow stuff here. It was literally everywhere. I've never, ever seen it in the wild. People had photos. There was someone with like reproduction photos, but they were still very cool. It was like off of the negatives. Postcards, cabinet cards, prints, like just all this sideshow stuff. Like in
Dave, I bet you people would be interested to know, like, how do you find out about all these different events where you're always sending me like a picture of like an antlers or like some kind of old picture. Like, here's Freud at a picnic, like from 1931.
Oh, yeah, that
you're
was
always
wild.
sort of coming across this stuff. So
yeah. I mean, if people like look up antique shows, I mean, they're everywhere. They're everywhere, and some are better than others. Some have better reputations, and but this one is known as like the biggest quote unquote paper show, I guess you would say, like in the area. I don't know if in the United States, but it's like one of the largest ones. So, and it was like really impressive. There was some really cool stuff there. Did I bring it with me? Oh, it's not here. I bought 2 things that had to do with sideshows. I had to. I bought this cool.
Look, you had sent me a message. I think it was like $200 for a little piece of paper, which is a little crazy, but
it was a print. In my mind, it was an old print.
Had I been there, I would have bought it.
Yeah, that was of Tom Thumb's wedding. It was like a Currier and Ives like antique print from the 1800s, and the frame itself made it worth it because the frame is from like the 1870s. So
dude, that's so cool,
very valuable. And then I bought this like cheaper thing. It was from the 70s, I think, but it was like a pamphlet or of some sort, all about sideshow. They were quote unquote freaks. Obviously, that's not okay to say anymore. But inside had all pictures and stories of all the various sideshow people. It was just so cool to find all this stuff after we did this deep dive, and I was like never really even noticed it. So it was kind of weird. But
yeah,
very cool.
I know it's strange, but like good for you for always being up to something like that.
Dave, when we first brought up this topic of stigmata, we hadn't really talked about
the way we would approach it, right? Because there's a couple ways to look at this thing. Like we could come at it from a spiritual, miraculous, theological approach, or we can look at it as kind of a terrifying phenomenon, right? My experience with this phenomena, I guess I'll use that word again, is, before doing any research, is strictly through that movie Stigmata that was, I don't know, like late 90s, right?
99.
Yeah, which I did not see. I'm sure you did. That's kind of right up your
I
alley.
actually just watched it. I haven't finished it. I'm going to finish it after this. I started it last night.
Yeah, no, I mean, I remember the preview and I remember like there was this, it was sort of like demonic too, wasn't it? It had like that.
I'll talk about it at the end because I
All right,
actually
yeah, talk about the
there's
end.
some stuff there I want to bring up.
But for me, like growing up very religious, and as I think you did too, at least mildly religious, right? We're both Catholic. Um,
Mid.
the movies with theological tones really cut deeper and were a lot more terrifying to me than the sort of Freddy's and Jason's and all those movies. And I think it's because growing up, religion, intersected with reality and still does for a lot of people, still maybe does for me in a lot of ways. And so when you kind of couple, like maybe take a movie like The Exorcist, and we don't want to get too much into stuff like that, but like, based on a true story, religion in my world was real. And you kind of like mixing those things together where you're like, if it's completely natural and normal to believe in God, then it's kind of completely unnatural to believe in like sort of nefarious other situations that could happen within religion, right? So it just becomes like this very scary thing. And I don't know how you're going to approach it, David. I don't know which direction this is going to go, but I think like maybe just take it from like, what is this thing? Like maybe not everyone knows exactly what stigmata is. Like
All right.
just
Well, first off, don't tell me what to do. But second off, I'm gonna tell everyone what it is.
I won't tell you what to do, but it sounds like that's what you're going to do.
No. Also, hey, Greg, stop telling me what to do. The other part of this is also we're going to get into a local story, which is
Mhm.
amazing. And I was thinking about this right before we got on today. I think when we first started this podcast, especially you, Greg, you were thinking very like local with a lot of
Yes.
like the content. And
Mercy Brown,
yeah,
etc.
yeah. So a lot of our early topics actually had to do with like local folklore and just true crime and stuff like that, all the things that happen in Rhode Island and surround. Um, and then we had kind of realized that like, oh wow, this reaches a significantly broad. Actually, Rhode Island is. I actually it still might be one of our larger
I don't think it is.
populations, but it
I
might
just
not. Yeah.
10,000 cities. That's
Yeah.
pretty good.
So I mean, this has reached very far. So I think we realized pretty quickly that like, oh, if we only do local stuff, that's not going to hit people the way like we would hope. So we've been, pretty broad with the areas that we try to cover, but we get to return to our roots a little bit on this one. And that story is going to be towards the end of this, but it's a very cool one. So just kind of wanted to throw that in there. What is stigmata? So a stigmata or stigmata describes marks or wounds and or sensations of pain that match the crucifixion wounds of Jesus Christ. These
Yeah.
can be present in hands, wrists, feet, as well as bleeding from the forehead, such as like, the crown of thorns,
That's right.
stab a wound in the side, which would be, did Pontius Pilate do that? How do you
No,
say his name?
absolutely not. Nope.
Who
Sure
did it?
wasn't him. The Roman soldier,
Oh, another pilot,
Pokey McGillicuddy. I don't know his
Pokey
name,
Pilot.
but no, because Pontius Pilate just was sort of like
How do you
the
say his name?
figurehead. Pontius Pilate.
Oh, it's not Puncture Pilot. Oh, get it?
Oh
Got
wow!
it.
All right,
All
not
right.
bad.
Or scourge marks on the back, like whipping, and those are all things obviously having to do with Jesus during the crucifixion. The word itself originates from the Greek word stigma, which means to mark, brand, or tattoo.
Which is
And
interesting because that's something that we use sort of in everyday parlance, right? Like and it still
the
sort of has like a
stigma
direct,
around that. Yeah.
yeah,
Um,
like
I literally
talk
just gave an
therapy has a
example.
stigma. Like you're
Yeah.
marked or branded as like, having a mental condition. Or
Gotcha.
so go
Did
on.
you want to go on or?
No.
All right. Thanks. Um, Also, it's referred to as the 5 wounds or the sacred wounds of our Lord. The wounds themselves. So this is what makes like a stigmata. So the wounds themselves never heal, but they also never get infected. And the blood often stays fresh. Another interesting thing about it is the blood is sometimes will have a pleasant odor. And that odor is described as the odor of sanctity, which is jasmine. This show is sponsored by BetterHelp.
You know, Dave, it's time for the kids to go back to school where they can learn and grow. It's a great opportunity for them. But as adults, we lose that curiosity, or at least we think we do.
You're right, Greg. For once in your life, having a goal to take steps towards is a key component to all of our mental health, and BetterHelp can provide that opportunity to us. A chance to engage, create goals that are meaningful to us, and accomplish them.
Or maybe you just want to talk to someone that gets you, and that could be a possibility, right?
Sure.
And with BetterHelp, they make that easy by aligning you with a therapist who really understands you.
Imagine. This is so important. And the fact that BetterHelp actually allows you to switch therapists at any time, if it's not a good fit, is such a key component to this whole thing.
Unheard of, really. So if you're thinking about starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. Rediscover your curiosity with BetterHelp. Visit betterhelp.com/nothing today to get 10% off your first month.
My curiosity is peaking, Greg. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/nothing. That's right.
Today.
Today. Do it. Do it now.
Yeah, it's like, did someone light a candle? And it's like, no, I'm bleeding.
It's flowers. Yeah. It's
Yeah,
literally
yeah.
flowers coming out of your skin. That's gross. Many show periodic bleeding, which may start and stop after receiving Holy Communion, or for others, it might start on a Thursday night and continue to a Friday afternoon, which is the period of time related to Christ's passion. And some bleed on specific feast days, such as Lent or Holy Prayer days. So it's a little bit different for most. Stigmata experts state that experiencers often seep not just their own blood, but Christ's blood as well. So there'll be 2 different blood types seeping from your body.
That is actually pretty interesting, isn't it?
Yeah.
Now,
Wild.
that's a pretty bold claim there, Dave.
Now, when you say stigmata experts, I feel like they're talking about
cardinals, maybe?
Yeah. It's like the investigative, church officials.
Right, but 2 different blood types, and no one could really kind of know what Christ's blood type is, really. But I don't know. I think that's pretty interesting.
I mean, they're literally like testing the blood type, and they're able to say there's 2 different blood types coming out of this body. Wouldn't it just turn into one blood type when they combine?
Isn't the first question
a stupid thought?
The first question should be like, what have you done? You've got 2 different kinds of blood on you, yours and someone else's. Like,
I wonder what made them even test the blood.
That's a great question. So as you're talking about this, though, Dave, are you feeling any kind of
No,
guilt or
not at all?
No?
Why would I?
No, I'm just saying. Look, I'm just testing that old Catholic guilt in you, because I have
To
some of
see
that
if we would feel guilt about questioning this.
What? Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
But that depends how we view this, which we don't probably need to get into right now. But whether we view this as no, that's a top. I know that's going to come up later, so I'll just say
Okay.
I'm going to curb that thought. I had another thought that I did want to share. Oh, the majority of stigmata cases tend to be female.
Mm-hmm.
And also they tend to be people of Christian religion. Although there have been some non-Christian examples.
There has. And then, there's examples in, even like Buddhists. And sometimes you'll see that in the, either
Hindu or Buddhist sort of imagery, there's sometimes like a bleeding hand like that. You'll see that sometimes. And that's kind of, that predates some of this stuff. And that's kind of wild too. Like, what
You know
is
what
it
else
about
is
that?
you know
Oh,
what
go ahead.
else is wild is you know how I said there could be marks in the hand or wrists?
Yeah.
Do you know why the difference?
Um, yeah, because well, that could be interesting, right? Because isn't there like some question as to whether or not Jesus was nailed up from his hands or his wrists?
I think
And
they've determined that it's most likely that people were crucified by their wrists
because you
because
would
the
slip off.
hand wouldn't have,
Yeah.
wouldn't have held it.
Which is very gory. But listen, so now you're like putting in this like the power of suggestion in people's minds. Now, if you were gonna, when we talked about sons and that was like that sudden unexpected nocturnal death syndrome, they were dying in their sleep from nightmares. So if you think that's fascinating, check out that episode. And then also sleep paralysis in the West, which is typically like an old hag. There's like these things that are happening in like this spiritual realm or in what you perceive as a spiritual realm, but you have to have some kind of lore to sort of support those delusions or hallucinations or reality, however you want to put it. But like there's got to be something there. So if someone might be having this thought that like, oh, look, my hand's bleeding because they were always taught that Jesus had the nail through his hands. They saw it on the crucifix. And then maybe
I
someone,
mean, the other part, it's like it's a very specific type of puncture that we're talking about for a stigmata. And if I
all the way through, right?
all the way through.
Yeah.
So it's not like, oh, my hand's bleeding. It's like, holy crap, I have a hole in my hand
Yeah.
on both hands,
That's different.
matching holes.
And let's
What?
not even get started on my feet.
Right, right.
Because it's a problems too. So, I mean, yeah, no.
But now we're talking about a hole that goes all the way through a person's wrist. Wild.
And now, is this self-report? Is this like, well, we'll get into all that, right? So,
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I'm
So-
interrupting you. Go ahead.
So
Where are you?
I was gonna do a little background on a couple of like bigger, well-known cases. I decided I'm gonna just do one.
Okay,
And
well,
you're really,
if we have time, it's
no,
interesting.
if you're really, because then you have yours that we're going to talk about our local case because we don't have obviously hours to talk about all this. I will say the first case, though, as far as I'm aware, was Saint Francis of Assisi in 1224. So that was a very first one. In a lot of his, from my understanding, and if you want more direct details, go listen to another show about him. But I believe he was like almost self-reported with some of his. I could be wrong on that. So
This is a super famous saint.
yes. Oh yeah. Yeah, for sure. Saint Francis of Assisi. You can find a ton of information about that case. The next one I'm going to talk about is actually a pretty well-known case as well, but I figured it was worth going a little bit deeper in with this one. This is Padre Pio. He was born in 1887. One of the things that makes him really interesting is by the age of 5, he stated he was going to dedicate his life was going to be dedicated to God. His entire life was going to be dedicated to God. So he was born, pretty average. His parents were peasant farmers. He had a brother, 3 younger sisters, and he had 2 siblings who died in infancy. So doesn't sound like they were like super wealthy or definitely not well to do or anything like that. As a child, though, he was also afflicted with a number of illnesses. At 6, he suffered with a severe gastroenteritis, and at 10, he caught typhoid fever. I'm surprised he didn't pass away in 1887 from those things. So I guess that's pretty significant. But he survived, and he still stayed very dedicated. As a youth, he reported that he experienced heavenly visions and ecstasies. So after 3 years of public school, he expressed the desire to become a friar. I picture that being something like Greg would have done. And then he took his family took a trek 13 miles, which, it's a big thing, I guess, for a family to walk 13 miles to see if he'd be
6 months.
Yeah, to see if he'd be eligible to join the order. But they were told they would be interested, but he needed to be educated further. So his father went to the US to work so that he could make money to pay for his son's tutoring. So very dedicated father. That's it's a really big gesture and shows the dedication that that family had for each other, and to like they were a very religious family. He ends up entering the community of friars at the age of 15. At one point in this man's life, he actually says that one day he will ascend to the highest post in the church, but further confirmation is needed. So he had it in his mind he was going to become a major figure in the church.
Yeah, but is that a little bit? Like, if you hear that statement, are you kind of thinking to yourself, "Wow, what an ambitious young man"? Are you kind of thinking like, is this a little bit of a grandiose statement? Are we talking
Well,
maybe?
what I actually was taking away from that, and as I get into this, you'll kind of see where I'm going, is like, is that a little bit of like foreboding of like reasoning why some of these things happen to him, like why he wants these things to happen to him, even though he kind
Right.
of like downplays it. All right, but anyways, so he reports that he experiences bodily marks, pain, and bleeding in locations indicative, but they're not yet visible, of the stigmata. In a letter dated 1912, he wrote of his devotion to the mystical body of Christ and the intuition that he would bear the stigmata. So he almost predicted he would have the stigmata. When it actually like occurred, he stated he had been so terrified by the phenomenon that he begged God to withdraw the stigmata. He also wrote that he did not wish for the pain to be removed, only the visible wounds, since he considered them to be indescribable and almost an unbearable humiliation. So kind of interesting that he rejects them, but also kind of embraces like the pain part of it. So I don't know
Yeah.
exactly how he's viewing what's happening to him. In September of 1918, while hearing confessions, it said that he had a reappearance of the physical occurrence of the stigmata, and his stigmatism reportedly continued for 50 years until the end of his life. The blood flowing from the stigmata purportedly smelled of perfume or flowers. He denied wanting any attention for the suffering, but in early 1919, the news of the stigmatic had begun to spread, and a pretty wide following of people, started to come to him for prayers or healing, or maybe just to see the stigmata, I guess you could say. He
Yeah.
often wore red mittens or black coverings on his hands and feet, saying that he was embarrassed by the marks. But that's
Okay,
also
so that's
kind of like standing out a little bit, right?
well. Here's the thing, like
Or
I,
nobody can see it.
he's like, I definitely have the stigmata. I'm just
I'm
not going to show you because
embarrassed.
it's very embarrassing, and I'm kind of humble and all that. So it's like that.
Greg actually has a crown of thorns under that cap.
That's what. Listen, that's what the kids would call that sus.
It's
Like,
massive.
no one's saying, hey, look, we need to be sure like that you're, if we're going to pray to you and, smell the flowers and everything like that, we want to, I mean, is there just flowers under those mittens? We need to see. And I think it's okay to question. And maybe people are afraid to question because they're like, if I question his authority, am I questioning like the power of God? And if I question the power of God, what does that mean for the sanctity of my spirit? Like, right? Like, it almost puts you in this weird position back
Yeah.
then. Now
Yeah.
it would be much more questioning of it. It's also this other thing too, where it's like, have you ever heard that thing, like maybe Psychology 101, that selective attention test where there's like a video clip and it's like, keep your eye on how many
Yeah. Then
times they
a
pass the ball.
a bear walks in the
A
middle.
gorilla walks by. Yeah, like
gorilla,
a gorilla walks by. And then it's like, so it's like if you're paying attention and you're looking for all the signs of this very specific thing, you're going to see that and miss all the things that are kind of like pointing to the opposite. Because I think a lot of people who are coming to him to pray really need this to be true because maybe it's the 1800s and maybe you have polio, or maybe, you have typhoid fever, or maybe you have tuberculosis, maybe you have these incurable diseases. Maybe there's a freaking mosquito around, and that's pretty much a death sentence back then. So like, you really want this to be true, so you see it to be true, and you're not like, I'm not sure about the
But
coverings and the mittens and all that.
everybody wants a miracle, Greg.
I know.
Well, we would all overlook a lot of things if a miracle was, in front of us, right?
Why
And
people join cults?
however, he was not immune to people, being suspicious or, claiming that this was false. There was one claim against him that the wounds were consistent with those that soldiers had inflicted on themselves by the use of a caustic substance, and that his wounds might be a skin necrosis that was hindered from healing through the use of iodine tincture or similar chemicals. That's not the first time that's going to come up. Once made public, the wounds were studied by a number of physicians, some hired by the Vatican as part of an independent investigation. Some claim the wounds were unexplainable and never seemed to have become infected. The wounds would seemingly heal only to just reappear. X-rays were also taken of his hands in 1954 and found no abnormality in the bone structure. Well, I guess that's not super surprising. Some critics also accused Pio of faking the stigmata by for example, by using the carbolic acid to make the wounds. The cousin of a local pharmacist testified that the young Pio had bought carbolic acid in a great quantity of 4 grams of Veritrine without presenting any medical prescription whatsoever, and in great secret. And Veritrine is a mixture of alkaloids, highly caustic product, and sounds like it's a kind of heavy duty thing. But he ends up explaining it that it was he was using this stuff to sterilize syringes used for medical treatments, and that after being subjected to a practical joke where Veritrine was mixed with snuff tobacco causing uncontrollable sneezing and ingestion, he decided to acquire his own quantity of the substance in order to play the same joke on his friends.
Oh, it's for jokes and laughs and
Yes.
medical
Yes.
games and hobbies.
And there were people who actually tried to validate his claim and say that he's just being mischievous.
Yeah, nothing says silly mischievous pranks like acid.
I mean, uncontrollable sneezing. That's hilarious.
That is kind of funny. Yeah.
Gotcha.
Also crazy making. People have gone crazy with that sneezing, laughing, dancing. Yeah.
So he was evil is what you're saying.
I'm saying I'll tell you what. I'm not saying he's evil. Although
you heard it here, Padre Pio, evil, causing people to go crazy by sneezing.
What do you think though? If he is using people's faith to propel himself into a greater position by deceiving them.
But but that's not his perception of it, right? Because in his mind, I am just trying to become one of the top people in the church, right?
Self-deceit,
he's not seeing it as I'm deceiving everyone. So it's you can make yourself do anything to get to where you want to be if you frame it in the right way, right? That makes you
right. So I get what you're saying. So you're saying he's thinking, I deserve that role. I can do really good things in that role, but I need to do what I got to do to get there.
I've dedicated my life since the age of 5.
Mm-hmm.
I have shied away from any single sexual encounter, relationship, everything that he's had to remain abstinent from in order to become a top figure in the church. And damn it, he's going to become a top figure in the church.
Yeah, no one puts Pio in the corner.
Nobody puts Pio in the corner.
That's what he always used to say.
I wish that could be the name of the episode. So in August of 1918, a few weeks before reportedly receiving the stigmata, he described a mystical experience during which he felt pierced and burnt spiritually and physically. According to him, this mystical experience began on August 5th and ended on August 7th. His spiritual director, Padre Benedetto, I don't know how to say that, interpreted this phenomenon as a transverbation. I shouldn't have stumbled on that word as badly as I did, which I had to look up to see what that was. And that's a period of time of religious ecstasy. But the type of altered state of consciousness characterized by greatly reduced external awareness and reportedly expanded interior mental and spiritual awareness, frequently accompanied by visions and emotional euphoria.
So
have you ever heard of that before?
Mindfulness? No, I mean,
but it's lasting for 2 days. It's a It's basically just like, it sounds almost like dissociation,
Yeah, that's exactly what it sounds like.
euphoric dissociation. It sounds amazing.
Well, yeah, it sounds.
I want to
Actually,
transverbiate.
know what it sounds like?
Verbation.
It sounds like mania.
Yeah,
So that's not so great.
that's or is it?
I mean, that's why you don't see people with bipolar when they're in a manic state. You see them when they're in a depressive state.
Yeah, until they've quit their job and told everyone to F off.
You're like, wait, what happened? Yeah, yeah.
So
Not that we're laughing at that. We did an episode on that. So
it's just so real, to us.
So real.
So he later claimed that his experience left a physical wound on his side, as we were talking about before, with puncture pilot.
That's right.
Most
witnesses. Proud sponsor of the podcast.
That's right. Most witnesses who examined Pio's wounds report that he had a wound on his left side, about 3 inches long in the shape of a cross. So that's kind of verified.
Oh, that's like double too. That's like a wound and the shape of a cross.
He's super holy.
That's everything.
That's literally everything.
Yeah.
Imagine like the doctor sees that. Oh my God, that's everything. I'm sorry to use the Lord's name.
The 1880 doctor would say that. He's like, well, I've seen it all now. That's
kind of bringing us to modern times. In 1982, the holy something authorized the archbishop to open an investigation to determine whether he should be canonized. The investigation continued for 7 years. He was declared a servant of God, the first step in the process of canonization. The investigation, however, did not lead to any public factual clearance by the church on the allegations that his stigmata were not of a supernatural kind. Wait, that's kind of a weird way to word that. So,
oh yeah, they'll be wording it real weird. So that was the Pope, because I looked in this too. The Pope authorized the archbishop to kind of open this investigation to see if he should be canonized, because if you're getting that stigmata, you're up for sainthood. I mean, if they can prove it, that's kind of like God is saying that this person should be a saint. If this is real, this person should be a saint. And if it's not real, like there should be some serious consequences, don't you think?
Right. Yeah. Well, in 1999, at the advice of the congregation, John Paul II declares Padre Pio blessed, and they give him a feast date, right?
So he's a saint?
They set September 23rd to be the date of his liturgical, I'm not saying that right. Liturgical feast.
Yeah, I mean,
so does that make him a saint, or does that just?
I don't think so. No, I think he's just blessed.
He's so blessed.
Is that John Paul II's way of being like, there's something here that we can't quite explain, so we'll
Sounds
just
like it was suggested to him, though.
Yeah,
like, you guys won't get off my back about this, so I'll give him a feast.
I'll give him a feast. I mean,
we love to eat. So.
Who doesn't love that? I mean, that's a win-win. Win or lose. So listen, why don't we take this to
take it to Woonsocket? Yeah, take it to Woonsocket, man.
So did you know that Woonsocket is historically extremely French?
Of course I know that.
Oh, okay.
My grandfather was French Canadian and grew up in Woonsocket.
Mine grew up in, I think, around that area, French Canadian too.
Well, I should say he moved to Woonsocket. I don't know. I can't remember what age he was when he moved there, but yeah.
So we're going to be talking about.
There's a big sign that says "Bienvenue."
That's true. Welcome
on Main Street in Woonsocket. Yeah.
Bienvenue. So Marie Rose Ferron was born in Quebec, so she's French Canadian too. And then she moves to Fall River, which is a very well-known city, really close to Rhode Island. Here, it's in Massachusetts, right next to. Well, it's not really right next to Woonsocket, but it's close. Not like really. Pio, it's close. Well, and Dave, it's like 15 minutes away.
You have to go over the bridge. It's 20. It's at least 25 to 30 minutes. Yeah.
Okay, fine. But that's, to most people in the world, that's really close. Half hour. We're like a half hour apart.
Yeah. You're fine.
So anyways, so she, like Pio, had a vision when she was a child. This is kind of like a through line. She saw Jesus, and he was carrying a cross, and she, quote, said that he was looking at me with sadness in his eyes. And she kind of like remembered that her entire life, right?
Mhm.
Very interesting that, like, do you remember that episode we did with Carl Tanzler?
Yeah.
And he had these obviously he had some serious delusion disorders. He had, his necrophiliac, was obviously all these horrible things, but he saw a ghost that sort of predicted his future too early on in life. And that seems like a through line between, like, maybe if you're seeing a ghost that's telling you how your life's going to go when you're a child, we got to keep an eye on that.
It doesn't seem great
It
considering
it
these two
seems like,
stories.
yeah, something's gonna go on.
Yeah.
But at 13, she's stricken with a mysterious paralysis, and her muscles are all contracted, and she has to walk with crutches for several years of her life. So again, there's this really early childhood sort of limitations that was keeping them both bedridden and giving their minds time to, I don't know, invent and become wrapped up in, I'm sure, religion and these stories and whatever. Just like the guy who wrote, is it Robert Louis Stevenson, whoever wrote
Jekyll and Hyde.
yeah, he was bedridden forever too. And it's like, the stories come to you, right? Her muscles would, be so painfully constricted that she wouldn't be able to move. She'd have to lay on a flat board and be strapped down to it. And she had intestinal problems. She couldn't digest solid food. She had a whole ordeal. This is very.
She suffered.
She's exactly. So she suffered a lot. And when a kid's suffering a lot, I think that lends credence to what we're going to start talking about here. Like, she moves to Woonsocket, Rhode Island, shout out, right? In 1925, where the following year, the stigmata first appeared on her in all the regular ways that you talked about early on, like in the hands, in the feet. The thing about Rose is, like, people were witnessing this. People were seeing this. It's not like they were seeing the wounds open up right in front of them, but by Lent in 1927, they were starting to see the wounds appear regularly every Friday. She lived in constant pain until she died at age 33. And people, unlike, with PO and like a lot of these other cases that we'll see, people weren't really able to kind of point to a direct thing she was doing to kind of produce all this. She was a sickly child, a sickly adult, and she kept having, stigmata, the crown of thorns, everything throughout her entire life.
There are pictures online of.
There's pictures. There's pictures. They it was always sort of in the same pattern. So I don't know if that suggests anything, but the problem is there was an inquiry into the case because she was obviously put up for canonization too. It's a really sort of like the Catholic Church hears this story. The Pope probably hears this story and it's like, oh my God, like this is like a great sort of feel good story. Like this kid suffered for so long, but the suffering wasn't in vain. Everyone wants to hear that story. Everyone wants to believe that story, right? Like she suffered, yes, but now she's going to be like sort of in heaven and maybe have a prominent role there. But they did an inquiry, and the inquiry ended in 1964, and the proceedings were decided that they decided not to canonize her. And they didn't really talk about why, except for saying that there was no cause for Rose Farron to be sainted. So that was based on the testimony of just maybe 4 or 5 individuals.
She didn't do enough. She didn't heal enough people. You have to complete a miracle, right? Isn't that one of the things saints have to do?
But people would say that like they talked to her and their lives were changed, and there would be thousands of people who actually visited her and said that like their lives were affected by her. Maybe someone was healed.
Has anyone ever told you that they talked to you and their life was changed, Greg?
Not yet, but I'm praying.
Yeah. Good luck with that.
Thank you. So I think that there's an interesting thing here because like 4 or 5 people were, made complaints against her. Maybe they were prominent, but there was thousands of people that said that she, was the real deal. And I think in Rose Farron's case, I think that we did have some sort of, so obviously there's trauma there as a child, right? And if you're going through a serious trauma, then you can dissociate. And if you can dissociate, then maybe you're able to sort of like self-harm in a dissociative state. I guess what I'm trying to say is it's possible that Rose could have been doing these things to herself and not known that she was doing these things to herself. And that would make her credible. And I guess in a way, Dave, it's for my parents, I have to say this, and for myself, there is always that possibility. And, for a lot of people, the reality that this is just is what it is. It's like, this is, people were critics of it because it's unbelievable, but that doesn't mean that it's necessarily untrue. And I
Right.
know that's where we're going to sort of part ways, but I don't know. Maybe there's something to it. And if believing that does heal you, if believing that you spoke with Rose and then, you were sick or you depressed and then you left that place and it changed you and you were better, that is a miracle.
Like, I was depressed, and then I saw what Rose is dealing with, and now
Hey,
I'm not
look,
depressed. So
right? Right.
worked.
I was depressed, but then that poor kid's strapped to a board because she
Yeah.
can't move. You know what I mean?
How old was she when she passed away?
33.
Oh
Jesus.
my goodness, the same
That
age as
but that is pretty
Jesus
wild.
Christ. Well, that's what it's supposed to be. That's like a thing. I didn't mention that in the beginning because I don't know if there's a bunch of cases that obviously it didn't start at 33 or they lived
Yeah,
past
Pio
33.
probably lived to like 97.
Yeah, but it's like, dude, you got some bloody wrists, and like that's your suffering.
Hmm.
Like, look at her suffering compared to that.
I know. And it's
Come
like
on,
you
Pio,
want.
come back when you're bedridden.
Yeah, and maybe for her, maybe she dissociated and she like on some subconscious level, it's like this can't be all there is for me. Like I can't. I always thought like I would contribute to the world. I always thought my life was more important. Like this suffering has to mean something.
Yeah.
And so you produce this, and I don't know. I don't know if that makes it real or if that makes it. It is kind of beautiful, like that in this case, right? If you take religion out of this kid's case, then she did suffer for nothing. She's just laying on a board, a
Sure.
poor kid. But since you add this sort of spirituality to it, it's like she has purpose, she has a reason, and she can really kind of like make sense of this and make this, have a life worth living despite all this pain. And I think in that sense, religion plays an important and a useful role here. A beautiful.
So here's the big difference between a case like Padre Pio and a case like Rosemary Farron. If he is not really experiencing stigmata, it is with intent to deceive.
Yeah.
It is use of dark psychology in order to
Sure is.
achieve some kind of status.
Yeah.
If she is not really experiencing stigmata, it is clearly not as intentional of deceit and more of like maybe a mental state, maybe a dissociated like state that it's occurring during. It doesn't have the same intention, it feels like. And that, is it just because she's suffering and his suffering is significantly lighter? I don't know, but like it has a different tonality, and in her case doesn't seem as malicious if it's not real. You know what I mean?
He didn't die at 33. Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Like, and she's also influenced by those around her. So that could be an interesting sort of
there's no
there.
like a trying to achieve some kind of status through it. Maybe she was. Maybe I'm totally off base by this thought process, but I don't get the sense that she's looking to like climb the ranks of the church based on this. I think she is
unless, we could always kind of go down weird dark paths and be like, as she gets older, how do I keep, attention?
Right, which is a big issue. Before we get into a little bit of that, I also want to just kind of explain to people. So she is buried at a cemetery in Woonsocket called Precious Blood Cemetery. If you ever go to visit her grave, it's similar to like what we talked about with Marie Laveau. Like people will leave little, souvenirs for her, and there's always lights. And actually, though, I don't know if it's like the Historical Society that had done this or who, but there's actually a pamphlet there next to her tombstone that you can grab, and it has the history of her available to anybody that were to go visit. And Precious Blood Cemetery is one of the most beautiful cemeteries in Rhode Island. It's probably one of the top three in Rhode Island, I would say. Absolutely beautiful monuments. It's got this crazy like Roman Colosseum looking monument there that was like an old, like, I think he was the mayor for a number of years. It's his family plot. But also, do you know about the flooding?
No.
So and this was before Rose was there, but we got hit with some storms. And the rain was so heavy that actually at one point bodies were floating in the cemetery, out of the cemetery. So there's actually a ton of corpses in that cemetery that probably have a mix of bones, or not the bones of whoever is supposed to be in there, because they were unable to obviously put together every single body that had floated away.
Yeah, and that's such an odd thing to be like praying over a grave or like visiting someone and being like,
I hope you have all your bones.
That's not all that.
I wonder who else's bones are in there with you.
Yeah.
But imagine that, like the flooding's so bad that you see caskets floating.
That's terrible.
Downstream. Because there's a water source right there. I can't remember if that's like the Blackstone's right over there.
It is the Blackstone, yeah. I mean, obviously, Woonsocket was, important during the Industrial Revolution, as well as Pawtucket and Providence and Cranston, all these sort of New England towns, but they were next to water sources. So towns built, they had to be near water. So, yeah, wild stuff. So, all right, what do you want to talk about? Quick, maybe some explanation. So we have to be like stick in the muds and talk about some psychological explanations here. I guess so.
I think there's like at the beginning, you talked about different ways we could look at this. So I mean, the first thing that we can do because of our jobs, we can look at like potential mental health related causations. Munchausen's is obviously very, and you said it yourself. If this is someone who is experiencing stigmata as a form of like attention seeking,
or even like Rose Ferrone's. I mean, if it could be, even if you want to think about like a Gypsy Rose thing, ironically, this name familiar, but like, if her family was sort of like putting these thoughts in her head, that's like Munchausen by proxy, and that's sort of like,
yeah.
But I'm not saying at all. That's why I don't want to like put any shade on the Ferron name, because by all accounts, or by most accounts,
but there are cases of people who have been. It turned out that they had ended up eventually admitting that they had,
of course,
faked it. It was a hoax, or they were trying to climb the social ranks or whatever. There's also a link between dietary constriction by self-starvation, dissociated mental states, and self-mutilation. So I read that in the context of like religious belief. So I a lot of religions involve like fasting. So I guess there's some potential area there. Anorexia nervosa cases often display self-mutilation similar to stigmata as part of a ritualistic OCD disorder.
Sure.
A relationship between starvation and self-mutilation has been reported amongst prisoners of war and during famines.
Dissociative identity disorder could play a role in this, where like, especially in the cases where they truly believe that this has happened to them, but like maybe it was another identity doing the self-mutilation, or, it's just, there's a lot of different ways to go with this. I think probably all of these cases, if they're obviously, if it's a case that's quote unquote, real, and I mean, there's going to have to be some kind of like trauma, right?
Well, I'd found a little something about PTSD symptoms expressed in an unconscious self-mutilation through abnormal autosuggestibility. So ton of terms there that maybe don't make sense to a lot of people. But there's just people linking certain things together to try to make sense of this really hard thing to make sense of. There was one thing, Greg, I found this quote from a psychologist I want to read. This was Leonard Zusny in his book Anomalistic Psychology, a Study of Magical Thinking in 1989.
Cool.
Cases of stigmatism. Is it stigmatism or stigmatism?
Yeah, because every time you say that, I'm like, I want to like, I'm picturing someone wearing glasses.
Yeah.
No, it's stigmatism, and the glasses is astigmatism.
Gotcha. All right. Fall into two categories: self-inflicted wounds, which may be either cases of fraud or unconscious self-infliction, and those that are caused by emotional states. So self-induced through autosuggestion, itching, and subsequent scratching, of which the individual is unaware, is likely to occur in suggestible persons if the stimulus is a mental or actual picture of the crucifixion used during meditation, and if the main motive is to receive the stigmata. The motive behind that may be unconscious conflict and a desire to escape from an intolerable situation into invalidism, and where one's needs are taken care of. It becomes a case of hysterical conversion reaction. Many cases of stigmatism can be explained as fraud or unconsciously self-inflicted wounds. So
Okay, see,
someone's
we kind of hit the nail on the head there with the like when we were kind of going down that path of unconsciously self-inflicted wounds. And
yeah.
we were talking earlier like with sons, and that's the connection there with sons and old hag syndrome. And say like you're part of your, maybe you're from a different part of the world where maybe your made up lore is that um something, you're something religious, like if you're very spiritual or powerful, like you can get like a hole in your stomach, whatever. And that's what you have in your mind, that's your philosophy, that's your folklore, that's in your mind. So if you dissociate, you could like kind of create that on your own, because you're like expecting to see that, right? It's like you have to have this built-in story for these stories to manifest. Like you can't just have no like, is there ever a case where the person is completely a-religious and has never heard of Christianity and received stigmatism? I don't think so. Right? You have to have that sort of
Yeah.
suggestibility.
So there's this movie that I love that's called Saint Maud, and it's a horror movie, but it's based about a woman who is like super devout, starts to engage in like punishment towards herself. At one point, she kind of like she puts nails in her shoes, just does all these like things to
Oh,
inflict punishment on herself, especially if she did something she felt was like sinful or something like that.
yeah.
And like it kind of, as as the movie progresses and you see the character development, you see her kind of like just continue to spiral and spiral into more and more of this like thinking of punishment towards herself, and like everything is like trying to inflict the same pain that Jesus would have experienced or something along those lines. And you could see how someone like that would be, you'd almost think would be like predisposed to like having something like stigmata,
Yeah.
because it's in their mind that like I'm allowing myself to embrace the same pain that Jesus felt, so you could see how that doesn't feel like a very far leap for them to suddenly they something happens and they have the signs of the stigmata, um because it's almost like they're, what's the word I'm looking for, creating that like road in their head that's going to happen to
Mhm.
them.
Like a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Yes, that's kind of what I was looking for right there. So I feel like a boy who decides he's going to devote his life to God at 5 is probably on the road to something like this happening versus, just a random atheist
Yeah, he has something like this almost has to happen. And when he gets
to
to a
give
certain
his
point,
life meaning.
yeah, and
Because like what meaning does your life have if you don't have anything? I mean, we're saying that from the, not like actually, but like, if I'm thinking,
right.
if I was in his head, like I would I would need something like this to kind of show why this road was so important.
Well, like the Heaven's Gate, and this is completely maybe a tangent, but like, when they said that the ship is going to come on this date, and then that date comes and the ship doesn't show up, they have to be like, well, I've devoted 20 years of my life to this. Like, I have to believe this now. I have to kind of make this. So you have to like kind of like up the ante, and maybe that's what Pio was doing there. But with Rose Farron, I think that's, and we can, obviously, what can you say about St. Francis of Assisi? I mean, you can't put it, I mean, we have no sort of idea what that whole story, like, I mean, who was seeing that? We don't have as much information, but she was kind of held up against, like, no one was like, no, this is definitely not what she's saying it is. Like, they investigated, which is suggests that it was believable. So,
Yeah,
I mean,
enough
who knows?
people believed it to justify or
Yeah.
validate the.
And we're not talking about like the
Yeah.
1500s here. We're talking about like the 1920s.
So I had one last thought that I wanted to kind of share about this. So there's
Okay.
two ways to look at this that are like assuming, or for on the road, like the path of like it's actually happening to people.
Yeah.
There's one where the person is experiencing the same pain and suffering that Jesus experienced. And then there's a second one that is actually, it's not something holy. It's actually something very much the opposite. It's the devil um disguised.
Ew.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. So I don't like that.
So what better way to disguise yourself than as something that everybody would look at as like a religious miracle?
So it's funny that you say that, because and you know, I don't know Pio, right? I don't, but if you know, by the story you told, it kind of suggests that maybe he was fabricating some of that stuff, or you could say deceiving. And you know, the word devil comes from from deceiver, the deceiver. That's what it means. That's what it translates to. So once you start deceiving people through the guise of religion, that's that's you know, the pedophile rings in the church and everything like that. That's pure evil, dude. So you're right. Like, there is sort of like a very holy way to look at this, and I think that Pharaoh represents that. And then there's a not so holy way to look at this too.
So I'm watching the movie Stigmata
Yeah.
from 1999 with Patricia Arquette.
Mhm.
And it's interesting. I didn't finish it yet. I have like 15 more minutes to go, or 20 more minutes to go. But as I'm watching it, so there, it starts off with like a crying, blood coming from the eyes of a statue, and you see the death of a religious figure. And as I'm like seeing, and then like later flash forward to modern day, and she's experiencing stigmata, whatever, and her symptoms seem to be related to that first individual that we saw pass away. I think he was Padre Pio. I think it
What?
was supposed to be him, and she was experiencing. I could be wrong. I gotta, like, I might have missed this. If someone's watched Stigmata and I'm totally wrong, they're probably like thinking I'm an idiot. But I think she's experienced she smells like jasmine. Her things smell like she has her. There was all these different things that were like, it sounded exactly like the things that Padre Pio went. So whoever made that movie was clearly very familiar with some of these stories, and
Yeah.
I thought that was kind of cool. I mean, I guess that's not like unbelievable that someone would have brushed up on the stuff, but like it's so cool
Yeah.
to like add references to like real life cases into a movie.
It's 1999 too. It's a little more impressive than it is now, right? Where like
Yeah.
information's a little less accessible.
Yeah, as I'm watching it, I'm like, oh, that's so cool. I just learned about this. And then they're referring to it literally in this like 99 horror movie. So I thought it was kind of cool.
It is cool. It is cool. But Dave, wow, this one took us a little bit longer than I thought it would. But I'll tell you what, that was a
You're always watching the time.
I know I am. So the thing is, I have fun with these Halloween ones. I love them so much, and I think next time we get a little more spooky.
Yeah.
But we got to talk.
I guess I can't remember.
I know I
sure.
can't either. But we got to readdress like an episode I got to talk to you about. I had a request from a listener who's listened to every single episode on the day that they're released. So we might want to like listen to that person. I think we have to, in fact. But anyways, we'll talk about that after. Do you want to talk about the nice email we got today? Or do we not have time? We want to do it next time.
We will do it next time.
Okay.
So we just, oh no, I'll just do it now since you just brought it up. We just got a nice email from a listener who is his second year in clinical psychology PhD program in New York City, but lived in Providence from 2021 to 2023. So he is right outside of where we were, where we are. And he just said he's a huge fan and he was interested in possibly coming on. So we were just chatting about that before the show. So I'm going to get back to this individual and kind of see what his thoughts are about that a little bit more. But he just, at the end part, really, always kind of makes us feel good. It was thank you both for your educational content and awesome vibes. Keep up the great work. So thank you very much, Christian. We appreciate that, man. That was super nice of you to say. And we will do our best, obviously, to continue that.
We might take you up on that, Christian, actually. We really are considering that. So that might be fun.
Yes. So everybody, thank you so much for listening. As always, if you can leave a rating review, it's greatly appreciated. We do need it so we can continue to spread this word as far as we can. So that's always something that we are looking for. And also, if you want to follow us on social media, we are on all the social medias. So Instagram, TikTok, X, not Facebook really. So not there, actually, I lied. And then obviously there's a support the show page you guys can access on Buzzsprout, or it's in our Instagram social media. So check it out over there. But everybody, have a great night. We'll see you next week. See you later.
See you later.